I love you being able to talk about the documentary style editing, but also the social editing. And, I'd love to bring Kara back in the room because she alluded to it too and kind of showed us Premiere Pro with her general workflow. But, for Kara, you've honed your skills both as a cinematographer and an editor. Is there a project that you'd like to share with us? And what tips and tricks do you live by? Are you using speech to text like Grant?
Yeah, a lot of similarities are definitely with what Grant was kind of saying. So I know I'll be echoing a lot of that. But I'll just pull up this project. This was the long form piece that I did this season with our rookie AJ. And I think some of my favorite things that Grant was saying was the autosave feature. If you don't have that in your settings, it saved me so many times. We've had, everyone's had a computer crash on them or the spin wheel of death that happens every now and then. The autosave feature saves you. You can always go back and say, okay, 20 minutes ago, I know I made this edit. Let me go make sure it's still there and then go back to a previous project. The other thing that he used that you'll see that I use as well, bins are wonderful. What I pull into a project is all over the place, the amount of different footage, then I start creating AJ Draft, AJ TikTok, All-Star, the Bulls game, footage from KT. So having bins just to kind of keep it all in place is extremely helpful. And then the project-wise, kind of like Grant was mentioning, I start with the interview, putting it on top of each other so I can kind of toggle between. And then I go every time I open up a project for a new day, or even if it's, before lunch or post lunch, I'll create a different version just because you randomly have an in and out point and you'll accidentally delete it. You'll be down 20 minutes into your video and you won't even realize that you deleted a whole thing of 10 minutes that you had created. So I think being able to have different versions as you're editing is so helpful. And unfortunately, I'm sure most of us have found that out the hard way. I'll make a footage for interview piece. So this is really just footage throughout that I'm grabbing and I know I'll want to use at some point. Let's see if you guys can see this better. This is just footage that it's not color corrected. It's just random things that I know at some point I might be able to use to help storytell. But this is kind of how I keep it. And then while I start trimming down my interview, here you'll see that I'm going back and forth with the interview. Right here, I'm picking which camera angle I want. So when I'm going back and actually telling the story, instead of having to pick the camera angle, I've already picked which camera angle I want to use. Interview 2, I've started cutting it down a bit more, started kind of separating it like Grant was mentioning as well. I'll put little edits in there so I don't have to stop and go find that footage, while I'm kind of in the grind of figuring out how to tell the story. I'll say, okay, here I want to fade to black and find a clip of AJ and his dad when he's younger. And I'll know later that I can go into my footage for interview and find where I have AJ and his dad and then drop it in to just kind of keep the flow of editing going. And then these are just, every day, like I'd mentioned, I'll make a new sequence, so I'm not deleting anything. When I find something that I know I want to end with, kind of coming from a storytelling background, I always normally find the lead and I normally find how I want to end it, and then you kind of fill in the middle. I'll normally keep however I want to end it back there and fill in the blanks in between, if that makes sense. Now you can see I've started kind of adding layers of sound. That will normally come later, the sound design. So I went all the way up to 20 versions. And now the timeline is a lot different. I know some people like to only have, 2 or 3 layers. I get made fun of often that I'll have 10 layers or 12 layers or 14 layers. It's just kind of how my brain works. But yeah, so that's kind of how my interview works. And then kind of like Grant was mentioning earlier too, you always have to be thinking social wise. So then I'll have to go down and create a sequence for, whatever our teaser is going to be for social. But that is what my timelines normally look like.
That's amazing. So much great insight. And I'd love to bring Tom back because we've got so many questions, amazing questions in the Q&A pod. Many of them asking for advice. So we've got a question from Sarah and Mackenzie. Sarah's question is, she's a career changer looking to break into video editing. What sort of entry-level roles should she be looking out for at a sports organization? And what are some portfolio projects that help new editors stand out when you're making new hires? So Kara, I'll throw the entry level roles, like what roles should she be looking for?
Teamwork Online is great for that. I would go and apply to any internship, any seasonal position, any assistantship. Normally when you look for full-time jobs, they'll say you need 2 to 3 years of experience. So getting your foot in the door and just learning as much as you can from different teams. I think that's like the best, and doing those seasonal roles are awesome too, because you're not completely moving your life for years. You're getting to figure out, have a year under your belt, learn from the people above you. So I think that was really helpful for me in my career before I got a full-time gig. And I feel like a lot of people do internships in this field. So I wouldn't be afraid, like regardless of your age, don't be afraid to come in as an intern. You'll learn a ton and you get a ton of great experience.
And Tom, what advice do you have from a portfolio standpoint for both cinematographers and editors or people wanting to get in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially for those of you in school now, I would highly, highly recommend joining, school clubs. I think my time at the prestigious Southern Connecticut State University, that probably very few people of you have even heard of. I joined the school's TV station, radio station, just constantly finding things to, keep me busy that would help me in my career. But to Kara's point, like to land an internship, people are looking for more extracurricular things on top of your demo reel, resume, whatever you may have. So I definitely recommend that. Just try and occupy as much of your time creating that portfolio as you possibly can.
Awesome. And we've got another popular question from patients. So we're going to go quick answers here. What type of laptops are you guys working off of? Is it Apple or Windows? And what are the models? So Grant, we'll start with you.
I got the new MacBook Pro M1 Max back in May, and it has been a beast. I mean, it's like I upgraded from like a 2015 MacBook that wasn't cutting it. Got the 64 gigs of RAM in this thing, and of course, like in 2 years, 64 gigs of RAM is going to be obsolete because it's probably going to be some other crazy amount. But so far, it's great. It's fantastic. I actually have had like little to no issues at all in editing with Premiere or anything. So it's been great. I highly recommend it.
What about you, Kara?
I actually have the same laptop, and I find myself using it over my desktop at work sometimes just because it's so great. It's so quick. My Premiere never, it never has problems with lagging or anything. So, yeah, it's awesome.
And Tom?
I think we're 3 for 3 on this one. I don't know how much RAM is in mine, honestly. I got a new laptop this year. I think the other one lasted about 4 years, but this one's been phenomenal. No complaints.
Amazing. I love it. And what are the most important skills for someone trying to enter into this industry? Kara, let's start with you.
I think hard work. Obviously, the hours are crazy and it's a lot, but at the end of the day, we're getting to shoot sports and be in the sports field. Or if you're even not in sports, if you can work hard and have a good attitude, it's going to get you really far. We're all, a lot of people are great shooters, a lot of people are great editors, but I think like your attitude and your work ethic can really take you farther than you'd expect.
Awesome. And Grant, what advice do you have to creatives or young people that are trying to just get started? Like, how have you found success in your career?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it starts, as you said, the work ethic and the work ethic and hard work, that goes a long way, and just having a good attitude, especially in sports, because just to add to that, like, it's a grind. It's really like you're working long hours, long days, long weeks, long months, long parts of the year. So you really have to know that, like, that's got to be your expectation. And, I think at the end of the day, you just want to be somebody that people are going to enjoy being around. Like, I like to always kind of, make sure that I can show up to work and have people just be able to rely on me, but also enjoy my company and know that I can be relied on for my hard work and my skill set, but also just be able to be there to support my teammates, and my coworkers. But I think in general, just being able to stay organized and be efficient is key too, because you're going to be on a lot of tight deadlines, a lot of quick turnarounds. So being able to come in and know your workflow, have that down, and being on the same page with your team and your coworkers is huge. So yeah.
Amazing. And for Tom, Brandon asked, what's the best advice for trying to make the transition from a small market like a state university to a pro league. I mean, you did it. You mentioned your university just now and how you worked at the Dolphins and now you're with the Golden State Warriors. So what are some of the things that you learned during your come up?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is an incredibly important asset. I think, I grew up a big Miami Dolphins fan, and that was my goal, was to work there. I'm still a huge fan, but that was like the dream job. It still is the dream job, right? So a lot of people, maybe don't necessarily go to the big school with the great program, but I think kind of, putting yourself out there and saying like, this is what I'm here for. I remember like I packed up my car. I saved as much money working in the summer, like 70 hours a week kind of thing, just to afford driving down to Miami, and just had a few months of money to live off of, honestly. And luckily it turned out, for the best. You sort of prove yourself in that moment. Kind of have to leave imposter syndrome at the door, because that's something, I still struggle with. I'm sure you guys feel the same way sometimes. But really just do whatever you can to prove yourself and just be a great communicator.
That is all such amazing advice, and we appreciate you hopping on. We are going to come back at the very tail end to do a little bit more Q&A, but now I'm going to throw it over to my amazing, amazing colleagues, Rob Laughlin and John Blackwood, to give us a proper camera to cloud demo, because again, like I mentioned, I get ahead of myself. So we're going to have them break it down for us. So over to you, John and Rob.
Cool. Thanks for having us. It was great to listen to all those guys talk through their workflows. It's cool for us to see, being on the product side of this, see how everyone uses it and uses it differently. So we talked a lot about camera to cloud in those conversations. So we thought we might take some time and actually sort of explain it and then show you what it looks like and how it works if you've never seen that before. So I'm going to share my screen here. Great. So, like I said, we kind of want to sort of like, if you've never heard of this before, what is this camera to cloud thing everyone's talking about? We heard, these Teradek and Atomos and all these terms kind of thrown around, but what actually is it? So the way I like to describe it to people, it's not a product of Frame.io. It's not even necessarily a specific workflow. But the best way I found to describe it is it's an ecosystem of integrations that, right, you can use to build your workflow with. We've got lots of different partners that work inside the camera to cloud ecosystem that upload their assets. So I'll show you sort of how it works here. So you've got camera to cloud in the middle between Frame.io, which is our, Karina showed very briefly in the beginning, our cloud-based review and approval platform, and you have your camera. So when you connect a camera through camera to cloud to Frame.io, you can start to talk between those devices, right? So the way it works is camera to cloud allows the device, whether it's the camera or whatever, to upload the asset it creates straight to Frame.io, right? So if I have, say, our new Fujifilm X-H2 that shoots stills, it shoots a JPEG, it'll take that JPEG and upload it to Frame.io. Then that JPEG's just on Frame.io, right? And then you can start to work with it from there. But, as another example, if I had a Red Komodo that shoots raw video, sends that raw video through camera to cloud right to Frame.io, right? Same idea, different type of asset because it's a different camera. But, maybe I don't have the internet bandwidth to push raw video, or maybe I'm not shooting with a Komodo, right? Not shooting with a Red camera. I've got some other type of camera like an FX6 or an Arri Alexa or something like that. That's where we have integrations with things like Teradek and Atomos. And the way that these work is the same way, right? They connect to the camera and they create a proxy. That's what they do. So then they can upload that proxy to Frame.io. So sort of the same idea, but it creates a different type of file. And that's sort of the way it works, right? It's pretty simple. Just takes the asset it makes and uploads it to the cloud. But of course, we have integrations that aren't just video, right? And aren't just cameras. So we've got stills with Fujifilm. We've got video with Red, but we also have proxies with Teradek and with Atomos. We also have audio recorders that can connect to Frame.io, Comfort LiveGrade for CDLs, camera ports. All of these other files are just as important to some of these cloud workflows as the video, so we want to make sure that they're included in the camera cloud ecosystem as well. So again, right, all of these things, Zoelog makes a camera port, it uploads that to Frame.io. Capture One is for capturing stills, editing stills, it'll send stills right up to Frame.io. Comfort will send CDLs, right? So very, very simple. We've got lots of different integrations which you can find online, lots of resources to learn about that. But what we want to do now is actually show it to you. So I think Karina mentioned this earlier. Frame.io is a collaborative platform, so we want to make sure you can all participate. So if you have a minute, take out your phone, scan that QR code. It will take you to Frame.io. It will take you to a review link, so you can see assets that we're going to create today for the demo. So I think John also has a direct URL to that if you can't scan it. But yeah, feel free to get in there, look at assets, leave a comment, right? Play things back. If you don't have the Frame.io app installed, you'll see a button down at the bottom of the screen that says Watch Now or Go Straight to Video. You want to make sure you click that, and it'll take you to an empty folder, and then we'll start shooting some assets. So let me come out of here for a second. So John and I are doing this together. We're not in the same place. We're separate from each other, right? But we're going to send things to the same location. So John has some of these integrations set up. So I'll let John sort of explain what we're going to see and the types of assets that we're going to send to Frame.io.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Rob. So we have 3 different devices that we'll take a look at today. So in my hand here, I actually have a pretty unique build, and that illustrates kind of where we see things going in the future. So I have the Red Komodo here. This Red Komodo is running the beta firmware that we mentioned. So this camera is actually connected to my Wi-Fi here. I have about 200 megabits upload, and I'm going to be capturing ProRes files. So as I capture ProRes files, this camera is connected to my Wi-Fi, and it's actually authenticated to Rob's project. So as I work, I can just focus on shooting, and this camera will actually upload its original camera files directly to Frame.io. So we'll have original files from there. On the back, I actually have the Teradek Prism Mobile. So that'll be our proxy solution. So that's working entirely off of the SDI feed, similar to how Tom was working and demonstrated with the Cube. And what's really cool about this product is it actually has the ability to mount SIM cards. So we see that as the future of, just connected devices, Internet of Things devices, where this device will actually connect directly to the internet. And, just like your phone, when you just, walk around to different places and venues, you don't have to worry about connecting to different networks. You're just connected to the grid. So we'll have proxies going up from there. And then we're really excited about our stills integration. So we'll have a Fujifilm X-H2S. So you'll see some stills go up from that. But with that, I'll pass it back to Rob, and we'll shoot some assets.
Cool, thanks, John. So I'm in Premiere Pro now, and I have my Frame.io panel up. Right, so this is now part of Frame.io, or excuse me, part of Premiere, just under video review with Frame.io. And I have this open set up to today's folder, and as John's creating takes, you can see it's automatically adding assets right into my folder here. So I have a video folder because they're video assets. Then they're separated by the types, or excuse me, the device itself, right? So we have the Komodo in here, and we have, like John mentioned, the actual ProRes files. These are coming right off of the camera. These are the actual ProRes files. If you were shooting in RAW mode, this would be our 3Ds, right? So those are coming up here into their RDC folder. If I come back to video, I've got the Prism Mobile, and these are the proxies, right? So these are sort of the ones I want to work with, and they're showing up right inside my Premiere. So if I'm working on something, I can see these assets as they come in, right? Say John's shooting the game or whatever it is we're working on, I can see these come in. So I can open them up, right? I can review them. I can take a look at the actual clip itself. I can, if I want to, say, this is a great moment, right? I can leave a comment on that asset right from within Premiere, and I can start my conversations as an editor with the people who are shooting, because these assets are coming in right from the, the field, the arena, wherever we are, and I can start to work with them. So I've got a bunch of other clips here. Here's John shooting ourselves on the webinar, right? But this is what becomes really powerful is when other people start to participate. So I can see here, this one already has another comment. So if I open this up, I've got my comment here and there's a reply. If I switch over to this, I can see John has replied to that. And now we've identified this as an asset that we want to use, and maybe I want to start to work with this, right? So what I can do now that this is in my Premiere panel, actually, we've got a third one. Let's see what the other comment is. We've got, John says that that's a good moment. Maybe I'll focus on this in my edit, right, this part. So if I want to bring these in, all I do is grab them here and then import. And these will come down to my system and go right into my bin. So I'll send them to my Scratch folder. And now they're going to import directly to my bin so I can start working with them. So this is sort of how you can connect the dots between what you're shooting and actually getting stuff out the door. So if I just do a really dumb edit just by dropping these into a sequence, now these are in a timeline, right? John shot these a couple minutes ago. They're already in a timeline. I've got my comments from Frame.io directly on the clip here. And in fact, John and I are working in a Teams project, so I can just hit publish and send my work over to John, and he can see that on his end as well. We can start working together. So that's a really, really quick run through of what's possible with Camera to Cloud. There's a lot more depth to it that we can answer. We have a ton of resources online for everyone to look at as well, which we can share. So that's it. Karina, I'll come back to you.
That was awesome. I want to see in the chat pod if you're excited about Camera to Cloud or all of the things we talked about. What is your favorite part of this webinar been? So throw that in the chat pod. We would love to see it. I want to bring everybody back in to the room. We want to get through some last minute Q&As. Again, John, Rob, that was an amazing demo. I love kind of showing the end-to-end workflow. And Tom, Kara, and Grant, you guys are you guys collectively are just amazing to listen to. So audience, throw it in the chat pod. What's been your favorite part, or what's resonated the most with you with this conversation? But we're going to get to some of the questions. So Rodolfo mentioned, what camera systems you guys use. We talked about it a little bit, but what about frame rates and resolutions? So Tom, we'll start with you. What's your general standard workflow that you're working with?
Yeah. Excuse me. For game action, we usually record 4K 120 frames per second. Unless obviously interviews, we're usually in a 2398 frame rate base frame rate for everything. But we also, on top of our Red Geminis, we also have a few FX6s and an FX3 that we utilize too. So all that kind of comes together when we, have a bunch of shooters to try and give a project off to someone like Grant.
Awesome. Kara, what about you? What are you shooting with from a frame rate and resolution standpoint?
We shoot on FX3s and FX6s mostly. The great thing about the FX3 is you can shoot 120 and it can still be in slow-mo with sound, but come out 2398. So that's what we shoot in mostly for game action, so we can have stuff regularly in 2398, but we can also slow down in post-production. We don't shoot too much in 4K unless we're doing a big shoot like a schedule release or an interview where we know we want to punch in. FX6s, we use 120, 240, both the FX3 and the FX6 shoot in 240 frames per second, so we try to utilize that in the games as well.
Amazing. And for all of you guys, how do you measure return on investment? How do you measure success when it comes to video, right? Like a lot of it can kind of be subjective. But Grant, we'll start with you. Like, how do you measure success when you're editing yourself? Like, because a lot of times, sometimes the views or the output doesn't match, the work that you might have put into it. So how do you measure success when it comes to video editing?
I think it's different for the project, but for me personally, I want to just be able to rewatch my work and enjoy it and be entertained. Like, I want to make sure that I like what I'm working on, that it's entertaining to me. I mean, like I said, sports can be a grind, but like, I love sports. So that's why I'll put up with the long hours. I'll put up with the late nights. I'll put up with the crazy schedule, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really feel like work to me. It just feels like, okay, this is fun. This is awesome. I am as much a fan of the game as I am, in production, and it's just the best of both worlds for me. So.
Amazing. And for Kara and Tom, we've got a question from Ashlyn in the Q&A. Do you find it difficult trying to create content after a tough loss compared to an amazing win? And how does the content change depending on the outcome? So Tom, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about this one a little bit earlier. A few years back, we lost to one of the NBA. It was the first year the NBA did the play-in games. We lost to the Grizzlies, and it was kind of heartbreaking. Like, our season's over. We're kind of on the way, trying to come back up after having the worst record in the league. But we ended up using so many of those sound bites from the post-game press conferences in the next year video. So I think we did a post-game presser with Stephen Curry, and he said something like, "Oh, you don't want to see us next year." And then luckily enough, last year we were able to win the championship. So you have to keep in mind the story at all times, despite we are all so emotionally invested in our team. And even after that game 1 loss to the Lakers the other night, I was pretty down in the dumps. But you have to, get a shot of the scoreboard, show the final score. You have to keep in mind that the editors will be looking for something, and hopefully it sort of turns into a positive, I guess, down the line.
Kara, what about you?
Yeah, I totally echo everything he says. Something that one of my coworkers used to make fun of me for was I was always trying to shoot for long form pieces like all access, shooting a chair and making a practice, okay, going up to the 300s level and shooting the practice court with no one in the stands. And, we shoot so many practices, you shoot so many games, falling in love with the craft and still loving to shoot and having that storytelling mindset in the background. Even if you're not doing long form too, even if you're setting it up for a quick 4x5, 59-second recap of a game, because maybe Trae Young or your star player had 56 points that game. You getting that footage and being able to tell that story, even a short Instagram clip, if you're not able to do the long form piece, being storytellers at heart, I feel really helps when, you're just shooting the 97th practice of the season and whatnot. Or game, I guess, in this instance, since she asked after a loss.
Yeah, it's you got to separate everything, which is easier said than done. This was an amazing conversation. I'm seeing the chat is loving this webinar. Rob said he loved seeing the live demo of it. Hope said she loved Frame.io. Reviews on the hardware were a favorite part. Lots of great info. Thank you to all of you guys for tuning in, our audience, and thank you to our panelists. John and Rob, thank you for giving us that live demo. And Tom, Kara, and Grant, thank you for sharing your insightful knowledge and the amazing work that your teams are doing. We love to see the work that you are accomplishing with the help of Frame.io, Premiere Pro, and all of Adobe's tools. The audience, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone have a great week. We'll see you soon.